Marcus Ellison was 41 years old when his wife loaded the last of his boxes into a garbage bag, set them on the curb in front of the house he had built with his own hands, and told him he had until sundown to be gone. She kept the car. She kept the house. She kept the dog, a 3-year-old golden retriever named Chief that Marcus had trained himself, one command at a time, in the backyard on Sunday mornings while Renee slept in. She had the locks changed by noon. She had her sister come over by 2. By 4, the two of them were drinking rose on the back deck Marcus had laid himself, board by board, on a summer weekend 3 years ago, and the sound of their laughter drifted through the neighborhood like something celebrating. What Renee did not know, could not have known, because she had never once thought to ask, was that her name was not on the deed. His was. Only his. The house, the property, the land beneath her feet as she refilled her wine glass and smiled at her sister, all of it belonged to Marcus Ellison, in a way no divorce filing, no emergency motion, no amount of confidence or cruelty could undo. She had spent 4 months building a plan. She had spent 4 months believing she had won. She had never once thought to check if the things she was taking actually belonged to her. She had never been more wrong about anything in her life. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 5:12 a.m. on the morning this story actually begins, which was not the morning Renee put his boxes on the curb. It was an ordinary Thursday in late October, 14 months earlier, when none of this had happened yet, and Marcus Ellison had no reason to believe it would. He silenced the alarm without fully waking and lay still for a moment in the dark. The house was quiet. He could hear the heat clicking through the vents, and, further off, the sound of Chief shifting on his dog bed in the corner of the room. Marcus swung his feet to the floor, moved through the dark to the bathroom without turning on a light. He had done this so many times he no longer needed to see, and ran the water until it was warm. He was not a large man, 5'11", lean in the way that comes from work rather than a gym. His hands were the most distinctive thing about him, wide across the palm, with the particular calluses of someone who had been doing the same skilled physical work for long enough that his body had adapted to it. He was a general contractor, had been since he was 26, when he left the firm he had trained under and took the first job under his own name, which was a small bathroom renovation in a row house in East Nashville that he completed alone over 11 days, and which he was still paid less than he deserved for. That was 15 years ago. He had built something since then. Quietly, without announcement, by 5:30 he was downstairs, filling his thermos at the kitchen counter. He took his coffee black, no sugar, had taken it that way since he was 20, and the ritual of filling the thermos, unscrewing the lid, pouring to exactly 3 inches from the top, screwing the lid back with 2 firm turns, was one of those small morning constants that organized the day before it started. He pulled on his work jacket from the hook by the door, a Carhartt that was several years old, and had the particular softness of something that had been washed too many times, and he patted the left chest pocket for his notebook. It was there. It was always there. Chief lifted his head when Marcus crossed the living room toward the door, big amber eyes, patient, waiting. "Not today, boy," Marcus said quietly. "Job site." Chief put his head back down. He understood job site. The truck was a 2015 Ford F-250 in slate gray, parked in the driveway at the angle Marcus always left it so he could pull straight out onto the street. There was a long scrape along the passenger side where a subcontractor's trailer had caught it on a tight construction entrance 3 years ago. He had never repainted it. The truck worked. It didn't need to look like anything. He started the engine and sat for a moment while it warmed up, headlights cutting across the empty street, breath fading in the cold air. The job site was a custom build in a newer development 12 miles east of the city. A 4-bedroom colonial on a corner lot, framed and dried in, now in the thick of interior finish work. Marcus had been running this project for 7 months. The client, a couple in their 40s relocating from Atlanta, had a specific vision and the kind of budget that meant you could actually execute it, which Marcus appreciated. He had built houses for people who wanted $90,000 of custom work on a $60,000 budget. And he had built houses for people who trusted him to spend their money carefully and build something that would last. He preferred the second kind. He arrived on site at 6:15, before any of his crew. He walked the entire first floor before they got there, which he did on every morning of every job he had ever run. Not because he expected problems, because looking at the work before anyone else arrived gave him the clearest picture of where things actually stood. Without anyone explaining, without any version of events. Just the work, and his eyes on it. In the master bath, he noticed the floor tile layout had been started in the wrong corner. The lead tile setter, a good craftsman who had worked with Marcus on 4 projects, had begun from the west wall rather than the center of the room, which would push the cut tiles to the most visible edge. Marcus crouched, confirmed it, stood up, and wrote a single note in his notebook. Reset bath floor, start center, not wall. Talk to Danny before he lays another tile. He did not leave a message. He did not send a text. He would be here when Danny arrived. He would show him exactly what he meant. That was how he handled things. Directly, without drama, and before they became a real problem. He was back in the kitchen area reviewing window rough openings when his phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from Renee. Running late tonight. Don't wait on dinner. He put the phone back in his pocket. Renee was 38 and had worked in pharmaceutical sales for 11 years. She was good at it, precise, persuasive, comfortable in conference rooms, and she had a particular way of moving through professional spaces that communicated competence without effort. When Marcus had first met her, at a mutual friend's housewarming, he had noticed that quality before anything else. The way she held her wine glass and spoke without filling silences. He had respected it. Still respected it, in the technical sense, though the thing between them had changed in ways he was still finding words for. They had been married 9 years. No children, though they had talked about it in the early years, and the conversations had grown shorter and more infrequent until they had stopped happening altogether, and Marcus had understood from the silence what Renee apparently did not feel the need to say directly. The house had been their project. The thing they had built together in the years when building something together still felt like something. A 3-bedroom craftsman on a corner lot in a quiet neighborhood that Marcus had found when it was a distressed property and had spent 2 years renovating himself, weekends and evenings, while he ran jobs for other people during the week. He had never mentioned, because it had never come up, that he had purchased the property before they were married and titled it in his name alone. It was not a calculation. It was simply the order in which things had happened. He bought the house in March. They married in November. The thought of retitling had crossed his mind once, briefly, and he had moved on to other things, which was something he would come to see later as the kind of quiet accident that can save a man's life. The months before everything broke open were not dramatic. That was the thing that Marcus would think about later, when he was trying to understand how you live inside something falling apart without noticing the fall. The changes were small, compressed, the kind of shifts that made sense individually and only told the full story when you laid them side by side and saw the pattern. Renee began working late on Tuesdays and Thursdays specifically. Not randomly, specifically, she started taking her phone into the bathroom when she showered. A small thing, barely a thing, except that she had never done it before. A new perfume appeared on the bathroom shelf, something expensive in a glass bottle that Marcus did not recognize and that she did not explain. When he asked about it, she said a client had given her a gift set. He accepted that. She stopped asking about his work. For years she had asked, not with deep interest, but with the ordinary curiosity of a person who shares a life with someone and wants to understand what fills their hours. The questions stopped. When Marcus mentioned a project in conversation, she nodded without registering and moved on to something else. He noticed and told himself it was stress, the quarter close, the pressure of her sales targets. There was a weekend in September when her sister came to visit, supposedly, and Renee left Friday evening and did not return until Sunday afternoon. She brought back a gift for Marcus, a bottle of wine, expensive, still in the duty-free bag. He looked at the bag and did not say anything. She did not offer anything. He told himself he was reading into things. He was good at that. Building a structure out of observation and detail, finding the problem before the problem announced itself. It was the skill that made him exceptional at his work and occasionally difficult to live with. He tried, consciously, to not apply it to his marriage. He was almost successful. The thing that changed everything was not a confrontation. It was an accident, the way the most important things are. On a Wednesday evening in the middle of October, Marcus came home from a site visit earlier than expected because a delivery had been pushed, and let himself into the house to find Chief alone and Renee's car gone. He fed the dog, changed out of his work clothes, and sat at the kitchen island with his laptop, catching up on invoices. Renee's phone was on the counter. She had left without it. He would not have looked at it. He was not that person, had never been that person, believed, still believed, in some technical way, that the choice not to look was a form of respect for the life they had built together. But the phone lit up as he was reaching past it for his coffee, and the name on the notification was not a name he recognized, and the preview of the message, 4 words that were visible without unlocking the screen, was enough. He set down his coffee. He sat with his hands flat on the counter for a long moment, looking at nothing. Then he reached for the phone. He was not proud of it later. He also was not confused about why he did it. There is a difference between refusing to look for something and refusing to see something that is already in front of you, and Marcus understood the difference the moment the screen showed him what it showed him. 4 months. The messages went back 4 months. The name was Ryan. There was a number in Nashville that he did not recognize. There were messages Marcus read without moving, without reacting, with a particular stillness of someone who is absorbing information that is too large to process immediately and knows it. He read enough to understand what he was reading. Then he set the phone down exactly where it had been and picked up his coffee. He sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time. Chief came and put his head on Marcus's knee, and Marcus put his hand on the dog's head without looking down. When Renee came home an hour later, he was still at the island with his laptop reviewing invoices. She put her keys on the hook, noticed her phone on the counter, picked it up quickly. He watched her check the screen from the corner of his eye. She put it in her pocket. "How was your day?" she said. "Long," he said. "Yours?" "Busy," she said. "I'm going to shower." He said nothing. He kept his eyes on the laptop until she was upstairs, and then he sat in the silence and let himself feel the full weight of what he knew, which he had not allowed himself to do while she was in the room. It was heavy. It was also, in some way, he could not entirely explain, clarifying. He was not the kind of man who confused grief with chaos. He had learned, somewhere in the years of building things that had to last, that the moment after a major structural problem reveals itself is the most important moment, not for reaction, but for assessment. You look at the full scope of the problem first. Then you decide what to do about it. He opened a new document on his laptop. He titled it Nothing. He started typing what he knew. The next morning, Marcus did something he had not done in 15 years of professional work, which was leave a job site before noon without a good reason. He drove to an office he had found with a single search the night before in a building downtown and sat in a waiting area with gray carpet and framed photographs of Nashville and waited for a woman named Carla Bridges to see him. Carla Bridges had been a family law attorney for 22 years. Her office walls held degrees from Vanderbilt and a framed article from the Nashville scene that had called her, 4 years ago, the attorney you want and the one your spouse should fear. She was in her mid-50s, compact, unhurried. With reading glasses she kept on a chain around her neck and a directness that Marcus recognized and respected immediately. She read through the summary he had prepared, a single page, typed, organized in chronological order with specific dates and specific details, and looked up at him over the glasses. "You wrote this last night," she said. "Yes, after you found out." "Yes," she looked back at the page. "How long have you been married?" 9 years. "Is the house in both names?" "No," he said, "only mine. I purchased it before we married. I never retitled." Carla Bridges set the page down. She looked at him directly. "Mr. Ellison," she said, "in 22 years I have walked into initial consultations, facing problems of every size and shape. I want you to understand what I'm telling you when I say that what you are describing is one of the clearest cases I have seen in a very long time." She folded her hands on the desk. "She cannot take the house. It is not a marital asset. It is your separate property, predating the marriage, titled solely in your name. Tennessee law on this is unambiguous." Marcus nodded once. He had already suspected this. He had spent 3 hours the night before reading Tennessee property law on his laptop in the quiet kitchen while Renee slept upstairs. He had needed to hear it from someone who knew. Now he had. "What do I do?" he said. "And in what order?" Carla Bridges almost smiled. "That," she said, "is exactly the right question." He did not tell Renee what he knew. He understood that this was not dishonesty. It was patience. He had a timetable now, a sequence of moves, a strategy built with someone who understood the terrain. The strategy required time and required stillness, and Marcus was extraordinarily good at both. He continued going to work at 5 in the morning. He continued making dinner 3 nights a week. He continued taking Chief on the long route around the block on Saturday mornings, the dog's enthusiasm undimmed by everything that had changed. He met with Carla Bridges 3 more times over the following 6 weeks. He assembled documentation. He organized financial records with the same precision he brought to a job site, sorted, labeled, cross-referenced. He photographed nothing in the house. He took nothing that was not his. He left everything exactly where it was. What Renee was doing in those 6 weeks, he would understand more completely later. She was building her own plan, which she believed was invisible to him, because she had never thought to consider the possibility that Marcus Ellison moved through the world with the same systematic attention that he brought to his work. She had spent 9 years understanding him as a contractor, a quiet man, a practical man, a man who drove an old truck and wore a worn jacket and never spent money on himself. She had built a picture of him from those details and lived inside the picture. and never once thought to ask what was underneath it. What was underneath it was this: a man who had, in 15 years of work, built a contracting business that employed 11 people and grossed $2.3 million in its most recent year. A man who owned the house free and clear, purchased outright in a cash transaction 14 months before his marriage. A man who had, at his accountant's recommendation 3 years ago, placed his business assets and a parcel of land he had purchased for future development inside a trust structure that was entirely separate from any marital estate. A man who had not done any of this to deceive Renee. He had done it because he was careful, and because he thought about the future, and because he understood that what you build matters less than how you build it. Renee had never asked, not once in 9 years. She had his income, had a sense of it at least, the residential portion that moved through the joint account, which was not all of it. She had never asked about the business structure. She had never asked about the land. She had looked at the quiet man in the worn jacket and the old truck, and had drawn conclusions, and had lived inside them, and had decided, at some point, that she could do better. What she could not have known was that the thing she was planning to take was not hers. The conversation, when it came, was on a Tuesday evening in December. Marcus came home to find her standing in the kitchen with a stillness that was not her ordinary stillness. She had her arms crossed. Her phone was on the counter, face down. "We need to talk," she said. "All right," he said. He set his thermos on the counter and waited. She said what she said. He listened without interrupting. It was practiced. He could hear the practice in it. The way certain phrases came out too smooth, the timing of the pauses. She wanted to separate. She wanted him to find somewhere else to stay while they figured out the logistics of the house. She had spoken to an attorney. She thought it would be cleaner if he moved out sooner rather than later. He looked at her for a moment. "I'm not moving out," he said. She blinked. "Marcus, the house is in my name, Renee," he said. "I purchased it 14 months before we married. You are aware that your attorney would have told you this." The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It had a different weight. "You'll hear from my attorney," he said. He picked up his thermos. "I'm going to take Chief for a walk." He did not wait to see her face. What happened over the following 8 weeks was not dramatic, though the pressure of it was considerable. Renee's attorney filed motions. Carla Bridges answered them. There were arguments made about marital investment in the property, renovation work, years of upkeep, and Carla had documentation for all of it, because Marcus had documentation for all of it, because Marcus kept records the way he kept job sites, complete, organized, and ready for inspection at any time. The renovation work had been performed by Marcus personally, on his own time, and partially funded through his business accounts, which predated the marriage and were separately documented. Renee had not contributed financially to the property in any quantifiable way. She had lived in it. She had decorated portions of it. She had made it a home in the ways a person makes a house a home. But the law in Tennessee regarding separate property is not sentimental, and Carla Bridges knew exactly where every line was drawn. There was a settlement meeting on a Thursday morning in January in Carla Bridges' conference room on the 14th floor of a building downtown. Marcus arrived at 8:50, adjusted his jacket, and sat down across from Renee and her attorney, a man named Fletcher, who was competent and slightly outmatched and seemed to understand it. Marcus had Chief's leash in his pocket, which he had brought because he and Carla had discussed it and decided it made a specific point without a word needing to be said. Fletcher presented an offer. It involved a significant payment to Renee in exchange for relinquishing any claim to the property, structured as marital compensation for the years of contribution and cohabitation. It was a number Marcus had already discussed with Carla. It was fair. It was, under the circumstances, more than fair. Marcus looked at the number. He looked at Renee, who was looking at the table. "I'll agree to the payment," he said. "I want the car returned. I want Chief." Renee's head came up. "The dog," he said, "is mine. I trained him. He's registered in my name. I want him home by Friday." Fletcher began to say something about the car. "The car," Carla said calmly, placing a single document on the table, "is titled in Mr. Ellison's name. You'll find the registration there." She slid it across. "We'd like it returned undamaged." The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Marcus spoke 11 times. Every time he spoke, he said exactly what he meant, and nothing extra. When Fletcher tried to introduce arguments about the emotional dimensions of the situation, Marcus looked at him with a patience that was not quite sympathy and said, "The law isn't emotional, Misty. Fletcher. Let's stay with the law." They signed what they signed. Marcus stood, shook Fletcher's hand, and looked at Renee once across the table. She looked like someone who had been building towards something for a long time and had arrived at the destination and found it was not what she had imagined. He did not say anything. There was nothing left to say that the documents had not already said more precisely. He picked up his folio, nodded to Carla, and walked out. Chief was returned on Friday by Renee's sister, who handed over the leash without making eye contact. Marcus thanked her. He took the leash, felt the dog's warm weight lean against his leg, and closed the door. He stood in the entryway of his house for a moment. The floor was original hardwood, hand-sanded and refinished during the second year of renovation, stained to a warm amber that caught the afternoon light from the front windows. The trim was white, cut and installed by his own hands over 4 weekends. The banister at the base of the stairs had been sourced from a salvage yard in Kentucky and refinished to match the floors. He knew every inch of this house the way you only know something you have built yourself, from the foundation up, without shortcuts. He bent down and scratched Chief behind the ears. "Let's go to work," he said. Renee accepted the settlement and moved into an apartment on the east side of the city. The amount she received was fair, and she knew it, which did not make it feel like winning. She had left a marriage, a house, and a life she had lived in for 9 years, and had arrived in 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor of a building she had not chosen, with furniture that was half of what she was accustomed to, and a view of a parking garage, and the silence of someone who had burned the thing that was warm. Ryan, whose messages had gone back 4 months, was no longer in the picture. He had been in the picture long enough to accelerate her decision, and not long enough to be a destination. This, too, was something she understood only afterward. Marcus, on a Saturday morning 6 weeks after the settlement, drove to the development parcel east of the city. 12 acres of land he had purchased 3 years ago, quietly, through the trust. With the intention of building, he walked the property in his work boots, notebook in his left chest pocket, coffee in his right hand going cold. The land was mostly cleared, with a tree line along the eastern edge and good southern exposure for the lots he had planned. He had a meeting Monday with an architect he had worked with before. The project was already in motion. He stood at the highest point of the property and looked south toward the city. The morning was cold and clear, the sky the particular blue of a winter day before cloud cover moves in, and there was no sound except his own breathing and the distant sound of a highway. He did not think about what had happened. He thought about what he was going to build. He took the last swallow of cold coffee, capped the thermos, and walked back toward the truck. He had a full day. He did not look back. He never really needed to. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.